Yesenia and Helia, and nurses, of course, are the queens of everything. And if I could say that today we have a nasty bit of news that one nurse is supposed to have killed 8 babies, well, funnily enough, that impacts far more on each individual. I know that, even in the wickedness of the police, we trust nurses to infinity. Thank you very much for coming. Now, Lisa, would you like to start?
Very happily.
Thank you very much.
Good morning. Thank you so much. It's just so wonderful to be in the presence of such amazing women and, of course, amazing men, because women on our own can't do this. So I'm enormously grateful to all of the men who are here today and listening and who have been standing by me. And I have to say a particular thank you to my 2 Police and Crime Commissioner colleagues, Mark Shelford and David Sidwick, for being here, and to my fantastic Deputy Ellie, because Mark is actually going to take over from me shortly, because unfortunately, and the reason I'm speaking first is because I have to run downstairs because I'm on the main stage at 9:10 and have to go and get mic'd up. But it's an absolute enormous pleasure to be here, and also to meet all of these women who we've all had Zoom calls and we've had phone calls and emails, and it's been lovely. So I'm just going to talk for a couple of minutes about how, as Police and Crime Commissioner, I started talking out about this subject. So it was something that I felt strongly about for a long time. I'd spoken to friends about it. But if I'm honest, I'd been a bit careful about who I talked to about, and I think a lot of us are. I was working in the private sector for years. I was, of course, would have been very careful about what I said, given my job. I was head of media and communications for the Institute of Directors immediately before taking this role, and it certainly isn't something that I would have talked about in that role. But also because I'd spoken to, and this is where the LGB Alliance has been such a tremendous support. My best friend is a gay man, and he's a wonderful, wonderful human being, and I love him dearly, but he believes I'm a transphobe for holding these views. And my concern was that, oh, am I the problem? Am I the one that has the problem with this? And then I put myself forward to be the candidate for Police and Crime Commissioner in Surrey, and I was selected by the Conservative membership in Surrey, and that was great. And then I started receiving all of these fantastic emails and phone calls and direct messages on Twitter from fabulous women like Kate and like Sinead here next to me, and all these great women started getting in touch, and Fair Play for Women got in touch, and I thought, oh my gosh, I'm not the only person who thinks like this. There are others out there who think the way I do, and so maybe I'm not wrong. And then gay men started getting in touch and saying, thank you, we agree with you, we think this is really important, and we don't agree with Stonewall. And then lesbian women started getting in touch with me and saying, we agree with you as well. And so I was very fortunate to be elected in May, and on my first day I went into to Guildford Police HQ, and I went into my office there, and I had a meeting, Ellie and I had a meeting with the Chief Constable, our first meeting with the Chief Constable, and I raised this issue with him. I said, can you explain to me why Surrey Police is paying thousands of pounds every year to Stonewall, because they don't represent, I don't believe they represent the LGBT community as much as you think they do. And I'm very concerned as a woman. I'd like to talk about crime statistics, and I'd like to talk about how we record crime, and I'd like to talk about women's safety. And I was shut down by the Chief Constable. So I raised it with the Deputy Chief Constable, who actually has responsibility in Surrey for this area. He was Stonewall's Cop of the Year a few years ago. He used to be a Brighton copper, and I got shut down by him as well. And I was basically made to feel like I was this strange woman with these funny ideas, and that I was just out there with these weird ideas. But I had so much correspondence during the campaign from these women, and I gave an interview to the fabulous Jo Bartosh, which appeared in the Mail on Sunday, and I said in that interview, it was the biggest single issue raised with me during the campaign, and I have been told a liar by my Chief Constable. I've had various people challenge me. It was absolutely the biggest single issue, and Ellie, sitting over there at the back, was the person who manned the inbox, and she and I were both shocked that it was the biggest single issue. We had no idea that it was such a big issue out there, but it is. And I, as part of my role, one of the roles of Police and Crime Commissioners is we have responsibility for victims. We get funding from the Ministry of Justice for victims in our force patch. And one of the things I feel very strongly about is making sure that we support women's refuges and women's domestic abuse services. And I've been very fortunate to visit a number of domestic abuse refuges around Surrey, but having never needed to use one. And I'm enormously aware of the privilege of being able to visit a domestic abuse refuge as a visitor and not as a woman who needed it. And speaking to the women who are running these refuges, whether it's Your Sanctuary or Women's Aid, we've got fantastic services right across Surrey, they were telling me how important it is to them that only women, only females are in their spaces. And Ellie and I had a very moving conversation with the head of one of the refuges, and I won't name her because it's not fair, one of the refuges in Surrey, who, when I told her that I was just about to do this interview with Jo and I was going to come out with my views, sat in front of us and just cried and thanked me because she couldn't say what I can because she risks losing her funding from the county council, who had already made it very, very clear to her that if she named the new children's library that they built in one of the refuges for mothers and children, the J.K. Rowling Library, they would pull her funding for being transphobic. So, as a woman elected by the people of Surrey, as somebody who can only be fired by the people of Surrey, if I can't speak out and I don't speak out for women and for men, then what am I doing here? This is my job. It is my absolute responsibility to all of the people in Surrey to keep them safe and to do everything I can to do that. And I have been shouted down, I've been shouted at by my chief constable, by others in the force, but I've also had so many messages of support from police officers who said, you're right, and we can't say this out loud, so thank you for saying it for us. So I'm about to go through a police and crime panel process in Surrey because there have been 37 official complaints about me. I've had the death threats. I've been reported for hate crimes. I will keep shouting, and the more they shout back at me, the louder I will shout on behalf of all of us. So thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm going straight on to Dr. Kate Coleman.
Emma, can I just ask, because I know Lisa has to go, and she's going to be taken, one of her colleagues is going to take her place, but can I ask before you go, is there anything any of us can do to support you in this battle in Surrey?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, my call to action for all of you in Surrey and beyond is stay angry about this until we get change. And I spoke to the Seroptimists group, not just Surrey, but wider, a couple of weeks ago, and I said to them, stay angry. In all honesty, if I'm going to be really selfish about it, first of all, write to your PCC, because it is important. I've got two fantastic colleagues here who are prepared to stick their heads above the parapet. I have a lot of colleagues who agree with me, but won't or can't say it publicly. And that's a genuine, and I'm the last person going to force anyone else to do this, particularly having been through what I've been through over the last couple of months. But write to your PCC, write to your MP, talk about why it matters, because the thing that my chief constable said to me is, no, this is not an issue. Nobody thinks this is an issue. It is an issue. It absolutely is an issue. And the people, the women and the men, particularly the gay men, who've written to my chief constable to say I stand with Lisa Townsend are the ones that have made a difference, because he now knows that I am not alone, I am not ranting, and I do speak on behalf of an understandably silent but absolutely a majority.
We've got a question, please.
It's more of a point of information. After Surrey Pride suggested that you might be in need of retraining, sending to the Gulag, I followed that. They issued a very threatening public statement which implied violence towards you. Yeah. They then withdrew it. The police chief constable then made his own statement saying how he welcomed input from anybody on this complex subject. But can I assure you that LGB Alliance is writing to the chief constable? We are asking for a meeting. And what we need to understand is that Surrey County Council, like so many county councils, is conservative, and yet they are putting up with this mad gender ideology and taking away our freedoms. So here we are at the Conservative Conference. This is the place to change hearts and minds.
It is. Thank you. And I should also say we have a fabulous Surrey Conservative County Councillor in the room as well. So Rebecca Paul, who is an absolute champion on the council.
Yeah, no, I'm newly elected. I was elected in May. I'm well aware of this issue. I feel the same way. I'm just in awe of what Lisa has done. And actually, it's given me the strength to start speaking out on this issue. So thank you, Lisa, but I will do my bit at Surrey. So.
Anybody else? No? Lovely. Well, try to stay as long as you can. The last few minutes would be absolutely lovely.
Oh, don't worry, I will.
I'm going now, I think, to Dr. Kate Cole. Kate.
Yes, thank you so much. So I've got 5 minutes and quite a lot to pack in. I'd like to start with a quick whistle-stop tour on gender identity and why this is an ideology. It's an ideology because it's not subject to the rigours of scientific method. It's unempirical, it stands outside of rationality and logic, it's untestable and by definition irrefutable. It's an extreme form of philosophical idealism in that your beliefs about yourself do not merely take precedence over material reality, rather they are constitutive of reality, and not just reality for you, but reality for everyone. What this means is that I'm a woman simply because I say I am. Because I say I am, I'm a woman not only in my eyes, but for the world. No evidence or further justification is needed. This is an extraordinary level of power to give to an individual's beliefs. In the case of prisons, we see a situation where ideology does not just meet reality, it has in some situations been substituted for reality. It's been substituted for reality where a male prisoner who believes himself to be a woman is permitted to transfer to the female prison estate. Where that male has substituted ideology for reality by changing the sex marker on his birth certificate via obtaining a gender recognition certificate, the prison service considers him to be a woman and he must be allocated to the female estate. In the case of male prisoners who have obtained a gender recognition certificate, they are successfully hidden in the female data. They are recorded as women, and any incidents in which they are involved will have that involvement recorded as that of a woman. Where a male has obtained a GRC, he will no longer be risk assessed as a male. If he's been convicted of sexual offences, this means that the risk assessment tool used for adult male sexual offenders can never be used for him again. Because he says he is a woman, he is one, including for the purposes of risk assessment. Ideology has been substituted for reality in the crime statistics, where self-declared gender identity is frequently recorded in lieu of biological sex. Thus, we have male crime recorded in the female crime statistics, which frustrates planning a proportionate response to tackling crime and the causes of offending. Where offence categories are only very rarely committed by women, the addition of even 1 or 2 males can have a significant impact on the data for female crime. Ideology has been substituted for reality in the case of searching. Where a male prisoner has obtained a GRC, because he says he is a woman, he must be searched as one. This means he's strip searched by female officers. The presence of intact male genitalia are wholly irrelevant to this. Worryingly, the MOJ are considering substituting ideology for reality when it comes to strip searching female offenders. The policy on searching of the person is currently under review, and one of the amendments on the table is to permit male officers who've obtained a GRC to strip search female offenders. Because they say they are women, they are to be given the duties of female officers. I've heard many times, well, does it make a difference if they have a GRC? No. A GRC makes no material difference. That it enables you to change the sex marker on your birth certificate does not alter the material reality of your biological sex. Ideology has been substituted for reality to produce a document which states that on this date a boy wasn't born, a girl was. But this is a falsehood. We heard at the excellent session with Helen Joyce and Julia Hartley-Brewer on Sunday that there's no requirement for either surgery or medical treatment in order to obtain a GRC or to fall within the protected characteristic gender reassignment. That's quite true. However, I don't believe that surgery or medical treatment makes the slightest bit of difference. We quite rightly do not question the maleness of men who by reason of illness are on hormone treatment, who by reason of accident or surgery have experienced the tragedy of castration, or who have the condition gynecomastia. We just don't. We recognise that redefining them as women would be an affront to the man in question and an insult to women. Surgery only makes a difference if you already agree with the ideology. I don't. You've noticed that I don't do preferred pronouns, nor will I use the word trans woman. When we are talking about the protection of sex-based rights for women and girls, clarity of language is paramount. To use the language of gender identity ideology, even in the context of disagreement and refutation, confuses the issue. It makes it harder to understand what we are talking about, and I believe that this is deliberate. I also refrain from using preferred pronouns in recognition of the freedom of speech that women in prison do not have. In one of the most egregious substitutions of ideology for reality, women in prison are required to use preferred pronouns and female names, including for those prisoners who are unequivocally male, with intact male genitalia, convicted of sexual offences against women and children. A woman in prison is required to affirm this ideology. She is required to use language which states that this male in front of her, this male who showers with her, is a woman, is female. If a woman in prison misgenders, she will be punished. She doesn't have that freedom of speech to reject this, and she cannot assert the truth that she sees before her eyes. But I do. I have that freedom to insist on reality and reject ideology. Material reality matters, and language matters.
Hi, thank you. That was really interesting. I'm just interesting. So I'm just aware that Downsview Prison is the first prison with a trans wing. I just wondered what your thoughts were on that and whether you had heard anything about how that's working in practice.
Okay, so I know that Nick can also talk about how the Downsview transgender wing is working. Quite apart from the question that forming this unit in the female prison estate took away extremely valuable and much needed resources that are needed for women in prison. So ignoring that really quite large elephant in the room, it's not a satisfactory solution. It's for male prisoners with a gender recognition certificate who've proved themselves to be too high risk to manage in the general population. So number one, as I've just said, you can't use the risk assessment tools that you'd use for adult men with sexual offences. So my own belief is that that means that that level of too high risk has to be proved on a case-by-case basis with women being assaulted and sexually assaulted. That's not acceptable. Number two, it's only intended as a temporary measure. These male prisoners are intended to be assisted in progressing back to the female estate. We also see from both the policy itself and the Equality and Human Rights Impact Assessment, which Fair Play for Women obtained and was really quite an eye-opening document, that the intention is to foster good relations between transgender women and non-transgender women, as they are referred to. And to facilitate this, there has to be interaction between the transgender women in E-Wing, the transgender unit, and non-transgender women in the wider prison at Downview. And the intention is that this should be beneficial primarily to the transgender women, because to treat them otherwise and to withhold those that integration between the two groups would not be in their best interest. It's quite clear from that document that the safety of women comes right down the bottom of the list. There was also, when they were discussing it, they had on the table, well, should we put high-risk women in there as well? Sorry, high-risk non-transgender women in there as well. They took that off the table, having discussed it. But at the judicial review, which was heard at the beginning of March, where a female prisoner brought a claim against the Secretary of State for Justice concerning the policies that enabled males to be housed in the female estate, we heard when the judgment was handed down that during COVID, female prisoners have been housed on the transgender wing at Downview at the same time as male prisoners for the purposes of isolating due to COVID. So we put in a PQ, and I think it was Tonya Antoniazzi who asked that for us. Yeah, sure. And we found out that the MOJ are reserving the right, because this is a local policy, that as local conditions change or don't change, they may open it up to female prisoners in the future. So no, it's no good.
Okay. Now, could I ask Nicola to speak, please? And thank you very much indeed for coming. You're an absolute, she's a mine of information, everyone. I mean, absolutely unbelievable. What would you like us to think about?
Well, so I'm Nicola Williams, Fair Play for Women. We were one of the first gender critical groups to set up about 4 years ago now. And we cover all areas: sport, prisons, changing rooms, Gender Recognition Act reform, the lot. So, my 5 minutes. Transgender women are women. Trans men are men. Now, you'll have heard that phrase a lot. You might have even said it yourself. If you haven't, I can guarantee that soon enough you will be asked whether you agree with it. It sounds progressive, sounds kind, sounds harmless. Surely only transphobes and bigots would disagree with that statement. And as David Lammy said last week, the women that object to this are just dinosaurs hoarding their rights. So, but when you say those words, you are aligning yourself with a set of beliefs that most voters will find baffling. And it has consequences. If you say trans men are men, then like Keir, you could find yourself on Andrew Marr saying that it's not right to say that only women have a cervix and that it should not be said. Or like Lisa Nandy, asked whether a rapist should serve out their sentence in a women's prison now that they identify as a woman, she said, well, I think trans women are women and they should all be allowed to go into a prison of their choice. Or Ed Davey, when asked whether there should ever be spaces where biological males can't follow women, he said no. So, I mean, I'm sure at first that phrase, trans women are women, was motivated by kindness, just to make people with gender dysphoria feel a bit better. But now it's a political demand. And it's a demand that trans women must be considered literally female, indistinguishable from females, and that their birth sex must be kept a secret. That their male bodies are literally now female bodies, and that their penis is a female sex organ. Now that demand impacts us all. Because when words like woman and female get expanded to include the male sex, it has real life consequences. So newspapers run headlines like woman found with indecent images of children, or woman exposes herself in a public park, or woman accused of rape. Now, readers are then misled into thinking that there are increasing numbers of female sex offenders, rather than understanding the reality that female sex offending is incredibly rare. Sex offending is a crime committed by male people, and we need to be clear about that now more so than ever. Now, when a female rape victim asks for a woman to examine her after rape, she can't be sure now that the person who turns up won't be male. And if she objects, she will be called a bigot and she will have to reframe her trauma. Women's prisons can and do contain male rapists, complete with a penis. Newspapers talk about her erect penis when describing sexual assault. And victims aren't even allowed to refer to their assault now as male violence. In healthcare, people with male bodies get called for cervical screening by the NHS, but others with female bodies get missed off the list, all because sex isn't recorded properly now by the NHS. In sport, women and girls are getting beaten and sometimes injured by bigger, faster and stronger males in their own sport, women's sport. Women are being told to take precautions around lone male police officers, while at the same time, women are losing access to spaces where males can't follow. And this week, the Home Secretary is calling for police to take crimes like indecent exposure more seriously, while at the same time, any man can be naked in the women's changing rooms at my local gym because he might be trans, and I can't be sure that I won't get arrested for a hate crime if I question it. Now, perhaps that naked male might feel like a woman inside. Perhaps he doesn't. And Layla Moran tells me not to worry. She looks at people's souls, just sees a person. But what everyone else sees is a man with his penis out in a changing room. Trans activism is breaking down the social norms, the social contract between males and females, where we respect each other's differences and make room for each other's needs, including women's needs. Now, also, when the word woman gets expanded to include others, it means that women and girls get left with no words to describe ourselves and our unique needs. We get called cervix havers, menstruators, birthing bodies, and as the Lancet most recently described us on its front page, on its front cover, people with vaginas. Now, this is not only dehumanising, but it is politically disempowering, because there's already a word that unites all of these disparate groups. The word is female. And without that word, our needs appear niche or obscure, rather than the needs shared by 51% of the electorate. Now, over the weekend, the British Pregnancy Advice Service bravely expressed this problem very well when they bucked the trend and said, we will continue to use the word woman over people so that we can continue to campaign effectively for reproductive rights. We cannot articulate, if we cannot articulate that it is predominantly women who are affected rather than just people at large, then we will find it harder to dismantle a framework that is underpinned by sexism. Now, they are an inclusive service. And so this, of course, ultimately benefits all female people who need their services, including those trans people who no longer want to be called women. Because when words lose their meaning, women's rights just becomes people's rights. And male violence against women just becomes people's violence against other people. So before you get asked, are trans women women? Make sure that you know what you're signing up for, because there is a conflict of rights. Both sides matter and deserve to be heard. Don't turn your back on women and girls, because if you can find the sensitivity and compassion for trans people, please make sure that you can find the sensitivity and compassion for the women and girls too. Thank you.
One question before we move on, and then we have more questions after we've had our next speaker. No? By the way, we've had an apology from Linda Ali, who's ill. Are you all happy that we send her a get well card from everyone? Excellent. Now, could I ask Dr. Hellier to speak? I have a little bit of a teasing thing to tell you. I believe she may be from Ireland, am I right? Mm-hmm. Well, I'm happy to tell you that in the European Union, in the European Parliament, we adopted the Irish language as our 23rd language. But the problem is that nobody speaks it. So you may have to come out to Brussels and teach people how to speak Irish.
I can't speak
Dr.
Irish.
Please speak.
Thank you, Baroness Nicholson, for inviting me to speak here today. My name is Dr. Sinead Hellier, and I speak in a personal capacity only as a nurse to highlight concerns where NHS policy has been formulated and enacted to the detriment of women. NHS policy tells women patients of their right to single-sex wards, lawful under the Equality Act 2010, for safety, privacy and dignity, the right to express preferences in care and be treated fairly and with respect. The NHS also reconfirmed 2 years ago that transgender patients can be placed on opposite sex wards based on dress, name, pronouns, and does not require any physical or legal change. This is self-ID. It is not lawful. After a public consultation, the government dropped plans to introduce it last year. To be clear, as part of its single-sex ward policy, the NHS allows full-bodied male adults to be placed next to women on female wards. Although policy states there are circumstances where a trans patient can be excluded, this generates a clear conflict of interest between patients and denies women the single-sex wards which the NHS itself recognises that they need. Many Stonewall-influenced trusts have developed their own transgender accommodation policies. This should provide the opportunity in policy to balance fairly the rights and needs of all patients. This has not happened. Policies fail to consider the rights and needs of women, and instead of being treated equally, prioritise male transgender patients in the very spaces set out for women. Nurses, such as myself, are tasked with enacting these policies, aspects of which undermine our ability to advocate for and uphold the rights of women patients, to safeguard women, and importantly, treat them with kindness, honesty and integrity, as we are professionally obliged to do. I shall give some examples. Both Oxley's and Humber NHS trusts equate women patients wanting a ward single-sex with racism. Women expressing discomfort, one of the prime motivators for single-sex ward policy in the first place, is now described at Nottinghamshire NHS Trust as transphobic concerns. Glasgow and Clyde NHS trusts suggest that when a woman perceives a patient as clearly male, that it would be appropriate for the nurse to reiterate that the ward is indeed female only and there are no men present. This is the NHS gaslighting women patients. In other policies, women patients who ask for wards to be single-sex are described variously as transphobic service users, offenders, perpetrators, or those who should be given trans education sessions to improve their attitudes. In some trusts, being a known male sex offender is not an automatic bar to female wards. Both Devon and Oxford, for example, allowed known sex offenders on female wards subject to risk assessment, which for Devon included whether there was a prescription of anti-libidinal medication to reduce sexual risk. Stonewall has on its website a guide for the NHS with practical advice written by Nottinghamshire NHS Trust. Endorsed as Stonewall best practice, it advises, and I quote, "If a female who was once male and has a past history of sexual assaults on women," that's plural by the way, "needed admission to a female ward, then she should be treated as any other patient and a thorough risk assessment be carried out. Just before this, it warns staff. They should be very careful if deciding to refuse. Just bear in mind, you would be in more trouble for denying someone's rights." This trust, celebrated as a Stonewall star performer, determined that a full equality impact assessment of the impact of their policy on women was not needed. This had real-world concerns. In one mental health trust, a male who identified as a woman was placed on a female ward with observation. This patient complained that the observation was discriminatory and it was removed. The patient went on to sexually assault 2 women patients. The same patient was placed on a female ward on subsequent admissions and each time assaulted women. Staff concerns were ignored. Policies compromise nurses and prevent staff from speaking out even when there are clear safeguarding concerns. Written into many is that questioning any aspects will be perceived as anti-trans, with consequences which include discipline and, in some cases, risk being charged with a criminal offence. In another trust, a staff member had a formal complaint made against her when she raised safeguarding concerns about their policy, even though to do so was part of her job. Finally, it is worth taking a moment to consider the patients most affected or most likely to be affected by these policies. To be called transphobic, to have their discomfort dismissed, and be placed on a ward with sex offenders. In acute trusts, most on female wards are elderly women patients in various states of undress, many unable to defend or maintain themselves due to illness, confusion, or frailty, and require intimate care at the bedside. They cannot move away if unsafe. In mental health trusts, a disproportion of women patients are survivors of sexual abuse. As they are detained involuntarily, they cannot leave, even when their environment is made unsafe. Many lack capacity, and as such, likely to be denied recourse to the police and judicial system if an unwitnessed sexual assault occurs, because they won't be deemed competent. All patients have a right to safety, privacy, and dignity in hospital. To ensure this, we need to safeguard values of care and rights of all patients. Thank you.
Questions? I've got a quick one myself before everyone else. I particularly hope the members of Parliament may ask a question. Dr. Hallier, can you explain to us why, since hospital services are eliminated from the Equalities Act, why hospitals are doing this at all? They're actually irrelevant.
I think a lot of it is to do with Stonewall and the need to be seen to be looking inclusive, which we need to be inclusive with all our patients. We need to identify the needs and the disparate needs of patients, but we need to make sure that the law is adhered to and that all patients are treated fairly and with respect. However, I think a lot of it is down to Stonewall personally.
Only to answer questions, should you want PCC's view on it, because Lisa has gone. So I'm Mark Shelford, and I'm the PCC of Avon and Somerset, and came to this, again, like Lisa, through, as a candidate, I was written to by a lot of people, and I didn't know much about the subject. I'm an ex-soldier. It hadn't been an issue in the military. It hadn't been an issue in my business life. And so I set out on a journey of learning about this. And it's all, for me, it's about safety and dignity. I'm not a lawyer, but it's about common sense and safety and dignity. And that's how I frame everything when I'm asked these tricky questions that lovely people write to me and ask, or approach me in the street and talk to me about them. So I'm fully supportive here, and I think everybody is incredibly brave, having come out and supported Lisa with a very measured article about how I felt that the contract that Avon and Somerset had with Stonewall was up for renewal in October, and we should look at that. And then if Stonewall do not change their policies to reflect public opinion, then we should cancel that contract. Anyway, the wrath of hell descended on my head. So I'm here and happy to answer questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes, please. A question. You've got a microphone.
Hello, my name is Marcia and I'm from London, and I worked for many years in local authority with abuse, etc. One of my biggest fears, I'm sorry, I've just come in because I was at another meeting. One of my biggest fears really in this situation is also for children who are being taken away. I mean, sexual abuse is rife. I always call it, since I was young, the best thing since sliced bread. It seems to me to come through this, under the door and the keyholes, through the keyholes. And that's my nature of working with it. Yeah. So one of my biggest fears is children being taken away on camping holidays, where men have become the women and the leader, and the risk that a lot of those children are at, and children in schools, because already I'm dealing with something where children are being sexually abused by some teachers as well. So my concern is in this issue is about the lack of questioning and safety for children being taken away from their parents' care as well, and they're being abused secretly.
Thank you very much. I think we have Lord Farmer is going to make a question.
I just want...
You need a mic? I take three at a time.
I can speak fairly loudly. Just to say that we did some polling last week for an organisation, new campaigning group called Women for Women UK, and just to find out what the public think. And we found concerning trans women in women's prisons that the actual net result, when you asked the polling what they thought, there was -1% of the general public. When you advise them that they were often full-bodied men, it went to -18%, and Conservative voters on the first question were -24%. So this statement that the public aren't concerned and they're more concerned about rights is not true. This was a 1,000-person internet-conducted polling done by a reputable organisation.
And that was a statistically viable poll, was it?
Yes, it was. And in fact, we're allowing people in position to know about it.
Thank you very much. I think, yes, please.
Thank you. Do any of the panel have any experience of the DBS service, Disclosure and Barring Service, and how that's playing out? And secondly, if we are asked, are trans women women, how would you recommend we actually respond? In a sort of public soundbite interview or something situation?
We have three questions. Who would like to answer it? Okay, from the panel.
Okay, well, I'll pick up the DBS checks because I'd made a note to mention that from the first question, because actually the way it works is that if a trans person wants a DBS check, they don't have to. They have a special hotline where they can phone, so that they don't have to disclose their birth sex. But of course, if they don't phone that helpline, if they just go through the normal process and say female, it won't get picked up. There's some really, there's so much concern over offending a trans person or even daring to ask someone's birth sex that it's leaving holes that will inevitably be picked up by people that want to use them. So that needs to be looked at. We can't have safeguarding without expecting that some people might try to abuse it. And in terms of the question of what do you answer when someone says are trans women? Now, to me, I say trans women are trans women. So I understand that some trans women, some don't like to be referred to as men, and so in polite conversation I won't talk about them. I won't call them men. But I also don't think that they're women, because the word woman means something, and it's an important word to us. So trans women are women. Trans women are trans women. But the important thing here is actually we've got to stop conflating the word or the gender identity with sex. So actually, I don't talk about. I'm a campaigner that stands up for sex-based rights. So I talk about males and females. Trans women are male. They were born male. They still are male, and women are female. And that's the main difference. That's the difference we need to talk about. That's why there's an issue here. So I say let's talk about male and female. because that's still relevant. That's a word that's not ambiguous, because like it or not, the word woman has become ambiguous. People don't quite understand what we're meaning anymore, but the word male and female has to mean something. So don't give up male and female.
Thank you very much. Oh, yes,
Yeah,
please.
just a couple of things. In terms of how to answer the question, I would take it back to, well, a woman is an adult human female and a trans woman is by definition male. And I would, as Nick says, you get it back to the categories male and female, and that those are the important ones that you really need to start hinging things on. And sort of a side issue from the DBS thing, I think a lot of people aren't aware that you can get the sex marker on your passport and your driving licence, which are obviously documents which are commonly used to establish identity. You can get those sex markers changed on the basis of self-identification. You don't need a GRC. You can just do it by self-declared gender identity. And I think that is a loophole that needs dealing with.
If I can just say one last thing,
Wait a minute, please. Please.
No, I haven't anything to add. No.
so, just to
Another quick one.
it's a very quick one. It's just to clarify, really, is that whenever we've got an issue, prison, sport, whatever, the reason that women have a problem with trans inclusion is not because people are transgender. It's because they're male. It's because of their sex, not because of their gender identity.
Yeah.
Gender identity is irrelevant when we talk about sex-based rights. So, we're not transphobic because I don't care whether someone's trans or not. I just care if they're male. That's all that matters in my thinking.
Please. You go first.
Thank you. Thank you. The law is actually very clear. Sex is a protected characteristic in the Equality Act. Gender is not. But gender has been willfully, the law's been willfully misrepresented by those groups who will benefit from that. So what should our response be? Do we need to revisit the law, or do we actually deal with this by some robust clarification about what exactly the law says? Because a lot of the stuff that you've been talking about today, particularly with regards to the NHS, I might add, should be dealt with just through rigorous application of existing law.
Well,
Yes, please.
Thank you. Just back to this sex and gender conflation. I had a constituent lobby me to recognise a third marker on a passport, and I made the point that my passport says sex, not gender. And I was unaware of what you've just said about being able to change the marker on your passport that easily. I've just replaced my passport this week, so my old one was obviously 10 years old, and I was asked my gender, not my sex, in the process, which then led me to question my original answer to the constituent. So, yeah, I just wanted to make that point. And the other question I should have asked Lisa was, did we manage to stop Surrey funding Stonewall?
I don't know if...
Female panel, please.
Right.
Female panel.
No,
All of us. You're very welcome to sit here.
it was a question to him. It was a question.
Well, I know. It's meant to be a female panel.
Emma, that's easier to answer questions.
Well, we didn't ask him on the panel.
Yes, we did. Yes, we did. Yes, we did. No, we did. He is representing Lisa because Lisa had to go.
Okay.
I'm very happy to withdraw. Very happy to withdraw.
Answer, Mark.
Emma, there's a
Go on,
misunderstanding.
Mark, answer.
Well, the answer I was going to give was I don't know in Surrey's case what they have done. In my case, it's working through the process. But I'm very happy. I don't want to cause embarrassment. I'm very happy to withdraw. And let's get on.
You were invited, Mark, as you know. You were invited. Sorry, it was misunderstanding.
And you've got a question.
Well, there's Ali's got a question first.
And just Kate wanted to just tell, because you know about Surrey.
Oh, just to confirm that they are carrying on with Stonewall and very proud of the relationship. Thank you.
I just wanted to raise a question. I was very moved by the stories of the NHS, moved to tears myself, to be fair. I wanted to ask a question about NHS. Kate did a bit of research and she found this information leaflet to parents. And it was saying, if your daughter dresses as a boy and acts as a boy, you may have to consider that she's got dysphoria and she may require treatment at her very good Tavistock clinic. Now, in this leaflet, they do not mention that she might be a lesbian. It's a 4-page leaflet. So it's about telling parents, advertising to parents, encouraging parents to talk to their children. Are you born in the wrong body? And here's the solution, Tavistock Clinic. There's nice drugs and there's medication and then there's surgery. And third paragraph, it says, NHS, we believe, the NHS, that gender is a spectrum. Now, my question is, who controls the NHS? And how can they say, we believe that gender is a spectrum? And it just seems to be completely out of control. And we did have a meeting at number 10 and we raised this and we said, well, they've got autonomy, it's a real problem. But, it's got to stop. And, you are the government and we do fund the NHS. But I just think it's part of the madness and it's rapidly spreading.
Can I just say, I think everybody should look out on the 11th of October for quite an interesting report on Stonewall in the form of a podcast, I believe, in several episodes, 11th of October.
Well, firstly, Emma, I'm sorry if we didn't tell you that Mark was invited to answer the questions on the Police and Crime Commissioner question. Yes, but okay. Secondly, just on the messaging, I find if you say biological sex is real and has consequences, and it is not transphobic to support women's rights, that usually deals with, it's a dog whistle, but people understand it. I was going to ask, actually following on from the question here about the puberty blockers and children and the safeguarding issue. I think I'm right in saying that the graph for the pharmaceutical industry who are selling the drugs and indeed doing the reassignment surgery is exponentially going up. And I think I saw a figure that it used to be, you probably more up to 2 in 100 or something, and now it's 20 in 100 girls going for reassignment surgery. But I wonder if you've got some update figures on and indeed on the Tavistock Clinic issue.
Yeah, well, I mean, in terms of children being referred to the Tavistock Clinic, that's gone up exponentially over the last 5-6 years, massive numbers. So, 10 years ago, there was, say, 10 children, mostly boys, that were going and being referred with some issue with their gender. Now we're talking thousands of children. But actually, the ones that are getting referred, that's just the tip of the iceberg, because actually, teenage girls can get testosterone off the internet, So actually, I mean, I speak to people who've I've not got children myself, but I speak to mothers who do, and I don't know a mother who has with a daughter in school who doesn't know of at least one other trans child in their school. It's touching every single school, and you get clusters of more than one. So there is social contagion. So there's a real problem there, and it's a problem that particularly impacts lesbian girls. So I'm a lesbian myself. When I grew up, I would have been gender non-conforming. I didn't know where I fitted, and this type of ideology would have been extremely attractive to me, and I could have ended up with no breasts and infertile. And that's what we're talking about here. It's serious stuff. So that's my answer to that, Anne. Just to pick up any more, another question, Emma, or shall I answer? So about Jackie's question about single-sex exceptions in the Equality Act. Now, actually, the Equality Act, the law is actually really good. It's very clear that single-sex spaces for biological women can be reserved. It's not unlawful to do that. If there's a good reason for it, and if those reasons are fairness, safety or privacy, you can do it. What the problem is that either organisations don't know about it because Stonewall have told them it's complicated, but actually, even if they do know about it, they daren't actually... they daren't have a policy. You know, even Marks and Spencers get worried when somebody says, well, you know, are your changing rooms single sex? You know, they fall over themselves to tell us that, well, they're nice to everybody, that whatever. So the problem here is we need to change the values, the value people put on women's privacy and dignity. Because at the moment, the kindness towards males that feel uncomfortable and want their gender identity validated is given a higher priority than women's basic rights. So there's a cultural shift here, but that only starts when people start talking about it. So dare to say that women's safety and privacy and fairness matters. And then just to pick up on the question about the X on a passport. Now, fair play for women, we actually tried to intervene at the Supreme Court a few months ago for a case that's going called the Elan Kane case, where it's been taken now to the Supreme Court, where somebody wants to force the government to record X on a passport. Now, that's the other frontier that we must all be aware of, that non-binary identities are coming forward. And the problem with non-binary identities is that it means people can be sexless. And if people are sexless, then they don't have to adhere to sex-based rules. So don't think non-binary is just something that kids do and it's not really important. Non-binary is important. It's the battle that we're going to need to win later on. So keep that in the back of your minds too.
Hi, my name's David. I want to say thank you to the panel for a really challenging and quite inspiring presentation. I lead a charity, which I won't name for obvious reasons. And we house people. One of the things that we do is house people. And we can provide housing for anybody regarding of their houses in crisis. We've got lots of different options. But we also have female-only spaces, homes of multiple occupation. And one of my greatest fears is being pressed into a situation where we have to, are forced to admit a male-bodied person. And I just wondered about the panel's views or almost tactics. What are the mechanisms and tools that we can use to make sure that the single sex spaces that we have are maintained and that they're maintained safely for females?
I think...
Can I have some more questions first? Somebody next door to you, yes.
It's clear from the panel where you want trans women excluded from, but how do you safely accommodate trans women, patients, and prisoners if you're not going to be if you're only going to have two types of prison?
With regards to the housing, it's the first thing I would say is to be clear, such as what Nicola was saying about the law, that the law does allow this. The other thing, of course, is the fact that if it is not offered, then certain women will self-exclude. So they won't be able to use your services, and we know that from women with trauma, religious backgrounds, etc. So that would be the thing I would say. With regards to hospital wards, with regards to... that we need to have proper equality impact assessments about these policies, because what's happening at the moment, and even with the NHS policy that allows transgender patients on opposite sex wards, we haven't had proper equality impact assessments to determine what are the impacts on all patients, what are the mitigating factors we can bring in, and what are the innovative solutions. I think that there will be... well, we've got side rooms as well, and we've got two bed wards. We've got side rooms with one bed. We've got side rooms with two beds. There's flexibility in the system. In addition, there will be bed managers who are nurses who allocate beds up and down the country, who will be doing good practice to make sure that all patients are treated fairly and with dignity. And we're not using that resource. We need to actually look at the expertise out there to actually inform this properly so that all the patients can be treated fairly. But there is flexibility in the system.
Just to add, if I could, to that, which is I've had a number of letters from people with the proper information attached, but asking not to use their names, in psychiatric hospitals where women have huge difficulty with men, whatever they're called, whether they're called trans women or not, and assaults and everything. And they're not under quite, I don't understand why, but they don't seem to be under quite the same constraints as in a general hospital. Something legal almost, and it's the psychiatric patients who have some horrific rape stories of trans women in psychiatric hospitals because they wander around and there's fewer nurses and so on and so forth. I believe this is to be completely valid from the information I've received and very worrying indeed. Mm-hmm. Is that the case?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Can you comment on that?
Can I? Yeah, I'll quickly step in about prisoners. Well, I'd firstly say that there are lots of groups of male prisoners who are vulnerable in the male estate, and they're vulnerable from male violence. That's what we're recognising here. Gay men, old men, disabled men, ill men, all of those groups of prisoners are vulnerable in the male estate, and they are all absolutely entitled, including males who identify as transgender. Every male prisoner is entitled to be held safely and be treated with dignity and respect. It's the problem of the male estate to accomplish that. We don't ask, in respect of any other vulnerable group of male prisoner, that the women's estate provide that place of safety. So why should we, on the basis of male prisoners who identify as transgender and who believe themselves to be vulnerable on that basis, why should women then accommodate male prisoners? I'd also say that the most recent data that we have from the Ministry of Justice, which relates to 2019, there being no data collection point last year because of COVID, there were 129 men who identify as transgender being accommodated in the male estate. So if the male estate can get it right for 129 of them, why is it that the minority who get transferred to the female estate have to be there at all? If they can get it right for the majority of this vulnerable group of male prisoners in the male estate using male resources, then they need to do it for all of them.
Do you want to comment on the psychiatric?
Well, they're not okay to go into female prisons.
Dr.
Yeah.
Dr. Sinyard to comment on the psychiatric patients, please.
The other thing, of course, with patients who are particularly mental health wards, part of their therapeutic care is being grounded in reality, which is being denied. In addition, many of them will have issues of disinhibition, etc., and therefore sort of privacy and bodily autonomy are particularly important and more difficult to actually ascertain, particularly if it's mixed sex.
Thank you. Someone had a question.
I was just, sorry, could you just say again, Kate, about the people, women identifying as trans men?
Oh, well, they're not put in the male estate because suddenly sex matters. The biological reality of immutable sex matters, risk matters. We all understand what the dangers are, and we understand that no female prisoner can ever be safely accommodated in the male estate. Suddenly it's easy.
Okay. Has anybody else got any more questions?
I've got a comment about what do we do with trans men and trans women then if we're excluding them from various spaces. And a good example is what's actually happened in sport actually at the moment, because last week the sports councils from all 4 home nations actually came together and issued some joint guidance about how to deal with trans women in sport, and it was good what they did. Interestingly, I think it was Lisa Nandy was recently asked about the sports question, should trans women be allowed in women's sport, or is it unfair on women? And she started off and she said, well, my starting point is that trans women are women, so they should be in women's sport. Now, that's the wrong way to do it. What you should do is say, what's the purpose of women's sport? It's because female bodies are different to male bodies, and that there's a performance advantage for males. And so who should be in the female category? It should be people with female bodies, and everybody else in the other category. And so what the sports councils have suggested, and this is then to say, well, what do we do with trans women, is we say, well, there needs to be an open category for everybody. That's the inclusive category. So any sex, any gender, you don't have to transition, or you can detransition. Everyone can go in that category. But then alongside it, there must also be a protected category for females based on birth sex. So you need to factor in what women need, because we're a protected characteristic, and then think of inclusion, but in a different offering. You can't ram it all into the same solution. So when it comes to things like changing rooms and toilets, there needs to be, women need a space, a male-free space, so that needs to be provided. But also you shouldn't force people into a sex-specific space that they might feel uncomfortable with, because I can understand that a person who identifies as a different gender might not feel comfortable going into a man's space. And so we need to give them a unisex space where their gender doesn't matter. So it's thinking creatively. It will always be a different solution depending on the type, and that's why you just have to look at your specifics and say, how can we accommodate everyone? And that's been the problem. Nobody's thought about everyone. They've just thought trans inclusion, ask the trans group for advice, what do we do? Everyone needs to matter. That's how the Equality Act works.
Yes, please. Last question, because we're coming up to 9:30.
It's just a quick comment, really. 3 years ago at conference, I remember walking in and there was some fair play for women people giving out leaflets. And I went up and said, I'm so pleased to see you. Well done. I'm a lurker on a famous parenting website's feminism boards. And there's a lot of discussion about this. There was a lot of horror last week with some of the Labour conference comments coming out. And I have to say, when I saw these events were happening, I was absolutely delighted. I thought, fantastic. The Conservative Party says we want free speech. We allow free speech. We haven't got people hammering on the windows. But I'm aware that for people on the panel and some of the people organising this event, it's a big deal to stand up and say, actually, I'm concerned about these things. I'm worried about young people. I'm worried about women. And I just wanted to say thank you for the people who organise this and the people on the panel who are willing to stand up for all our rights.
Excellent. Thank you. Well done. Well, I think that's given us our wind-up, everybody, and thank you very much indeed. And if I could also thank Mark, thank you very much indeed. A true gentleman. Lovely. Thank you all very much. And could I thank Ashley, who's speaking this afternoon on Iraq. He's come to this conference a completely different reason. I dragged him in to help me. So thank you very much, Ashley. And we'll hear him this afternoon on trade and industry in Iraq.